paralyzed woman left alone at cafe, then a stranger millionaire walked up to her. The rain started just after 2 o'clock on that October afternoon in downtown Seattle, the kind of persistent drizzle that the city was famous for, not dramatic enough to send people running for cover, but steady enough to turn the world gray and soft around the edges. Elena Brooks sat by the large front window of Café Solstice, watching water droplets race each other down the glass, her wheelchair positioned at the accessible table near the entrance that had become her usual spot over the past year. She'd arrived at 1:30, early as always, because maneuvering her wheelchair through the cafe's narrow doorway and finding the right position at the table took time and effort that she preferred to manage without the pressure of friends waiting impatiently. Her coffee sat before her now, growing cold, the foam art that had once looked like a leaf, now just a brown blur in lukewarm liquid. She checked her phone again, though she already knew what she'd find: 3 text messages, each containing a different excuse wrapped in apologetic emojis. "So sorry, babe. Got called into work." "Rain check? Sarah?" "Elena, I'm so sorry. My kid is sick and I can't find a sitter. Next week for sure. Jennifer." "Girl, I'm the worst. Completely forgot I have a dentist appointment. Forgive me? Melissa." Elena stared at the messages, feeling the familiar ache settle in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite disappointment, just a dull acceptance that had become her constant companion over the past 2 years. 2 years since the accident. 2 years since everything changed. 2 years since she'd had to relearn what it meant to exist in a body that no longer moved the way her mind remembered. Before the accident, Elena had been a dancer. Not professionally, she'd never quite had the courage or perhaps the talent to pursue that dream fully, but dance had defined her identity in ways that seemed impossible to explain to people who'd never felt that particular magic. She'd taught classes at a local studio, performed in community productions, spent her weekends at workshops learning new techniques. Her body had been her instrument, her means of expression, the way she understood and moved through the world. Then came that Friday night 24 months ago. Elena had been driving home from a late rehearsal, tired but content, already thinking about the shower and sleep waiting for her. The drunk driver had run the red light at 45 miles per hour, T-boning Elena's small sedan on the driver's side. She remembered the sound, metal crushing, glass shattering, her own scream cut short as the world spun and then went dark. She'd woken up 3 days later in a hospital bed, her mother crying at her bedside, and gradually understood through morphine haze and doctors' careful words that her spinal cord had been severely damaged, that she'd never walk again, never dance, never move through space with the fluid grace that had been as natural to her as breathing. At 26 years old, Elena's life had been divided into before and after, with no bridge between them. The physical recovery had been brutal surgeries, infections, physical therapy that hurt more than the accident itself. But the emotional fallout had been somehow worse. Her fiancé Marcus had stayed for 6 months, making all the right supportive noises, but Elena had seen the truth in his eyes, the discomfort, the grief for the woman he'd fallen in love with, the growing realization that he didn't want this life, this future with a paralyzed wife who needed help with basic tasks. When he'd finally admitted he couldn't do it anymore, Elena had felt relief mixed with her heartbreak. At least the waiting was over. Her friends had been there initially, visiting the hospital and then her apartment, bringing meals and flowers and awkward cheerfulness. But gradually, they drifted away. Not dramatically, there was no fight, no moment of abandonment, just a slow fading as they returned to their active lives of hiking and dancing and activities Elena could no longer join. The invitations came less frequently, the texts grew more sporadic, and eventually Elena understood she'd become the friend they felt guilty about, but didn't actually want to see anymore. The irony of being left alone at a cafe because friends couldn't be bothered to show up wasn't lost on Elena. This was supposed to be her re-entry into social life, her attempt to prove she was still the same person despite the wheelchair. She'd chosen Café Solstice specifically because it was accessible wide doorways, tables at the right height, an accessible bathroom that actually functioned. She'd texted her friends weeks ago proposing this meetup, had confirmed multiple times, had even offered to drive to a different location if this one was inconvenient. And still, here she sat alone, watching rain race down windows while her coffee went cold, and other cafe patrons carefully avoided making eye contact with the woman in the wheelchair sitting by herself. Before we continue with this story about unexpected connection and seeing people's true worth, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you believe that sometimes the people society overlooks are exactly the ones who teach us what actually matters. Now let's see what happens when Ethan decides to act on his instinct toward kindness. Elena knew she should leave. Sitting here alone just made the abandonment more obvious, more pathetic. But something kept her rooted to this spot. Stubbornness maybe, or just exhaustion with the effort of moving, of existing, of trying to pretend everything was fine when nothing had been fine for 2 years. So she stayed, staring out the window, trying to remember what it had felt like to move freely through the world. Across the cafe, at a small table near the back, Ethan Cole was having his own crisis of faith, though his was wrapped in a $30,000 suit and involved considerably more zeros in his bank account. At 37, Ethan had achieved the kind of success most people only dreamed about. His tech company, Cole Innovations, had revolutionized data security systems and made him a multi-millionaire by age 30. Now, 7 years later, he was approaching billionaire status, with tech blogs and business magazines regularly featuring his latest innovations. But success, Ethan had discovered, was profoundly lonely. The higher he climbed, the harder it became to find people who saw him rather than his net worth. Every friendship felt transactional, every romantic relationship shadowed by questions about motivation. Did they want him, or what he could provide? Were they interested in Ethan the person, or Ethan the bank account? After his last girlfriend had sold their private moments to a tabloid for 6 figures, Ethan had retreated almost entirely from social connections. He'd come to Cafe Solstice that afternoon to escape a business lunch that had devolved into exactly the kind of shallow networking he'd come to despise. A venture capitalist pitching investment opportunities while barely disguising his contempt for Ethan's working-class origins. "It's impressive," the man had said, "how far someone from your background can rise with the right opportunities." The implication being clear, Ethan's success was luck rather than talent, chance rather than years of brilliant work. So Ethan had excused himself, walked 4 blocks in increasing rain, and ended up at this cafe that looked unpretentious and blessedly free of anyone who might recognize him. He'd ordered black coffee, found a corner table, and tried to remember why he'd wanted success so badly when it seemed to cost every genuine human connection he'd once had. That's when he'd noticed her, the woman in the wheelchair by the window, sitting absolutely still, staring at rain with an expression Ethan recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror. Loneliness, the specific kind that came from being surrounded by people but profoundly isolated nonetheless. Ethan watched the woman Elena, though he didn't know her name yet, for several minutes, not staring but observing with the kind of attention he'd learned in business. She checked her phone repeatedly, each time her shoulders dropping slightly more. She was being stood up, he realized. Friends or a date, someone who'd promised to show up and hadn't. The pain in her posture was palpable even from across the cafe. Then her phone slipped from her hand, falling to the floor beside her wheelchair. Elena looked down at it, and Ethan saw her face cycle through emotions, frustration, resignation, the visible mental calculation of whether retrieving it was worth the effort. She started to lean down, trying to reach without leaving her chair, but the angle was wrong. The phone had landed just far enough away that she couldn't quite grasp it. Other cafe patrons noticed. Ethan watched them glance at Elena's struggle, then quickly look away, returning to their laptops and conversations. No one moved to help. Whether it was discomfort around disability, fear of overstepping, or just self-absorption, the effect was the same: a woman clearly needing assistance being systematically ignored by a room full of people. Ethan stood before consciously deciding to move, his body acting on an instinct toward kindness that wealth and cynicism hadn't quite killed. He crossed the cafe quickly, arriving at Elena's table just as she was making another attempt to reach the phone. He bent down, picked it up, and placed it gently on the table in front of her. "You dropped this," he said, his voice quiet and non-intrusive. Elena looked up sharply, clearly startled. Her face was striking, angular and expressive, with dark eyes that held both wariness and surprise. She was younger than Ethan had initially thought, maybe late 20s, with the kind of beauty that came from interesting features rather than conventional prettiness. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but with an edge of embarrassment that made Ethan's chest tighten. She was ashamed that she'd needed help, he realized. Ashamed that something as simple as dropping a phone had become a spectacle of her limitations. Ethan should have walked away then. He'd done the kind thing, helped someone who needed it, fulfilled his daily quota of basic human decency. But something about the loneliness in Elena's eyes, the way she was trying so hard to seem fine when she clearly wasn't, made him linger. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I could use a little company too." Elena's surprise deepened, her eyes widening slightly. "You want to sit with me?" The question came out before she could stop it, revealing more than she probably intended. She was used to being avoided, Ethan understood. Used to people finding reasons to keep their distance from the woman in the wheelchair. "If you don't mind," Ethan said, already pulling out the chair. "I just escaped a terrible business lunch, and sitting alone is making me rehash it in my head." A conversation with someone new would be a welcome distraction. Elena studied him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if this was pity or genuine interest. Ethan met her gaze steadily, letting her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but I should warn you, I'm not exactly great company today. I was supposed to meet friends who all bailed at the last minute." "That makes two of us having disappointing days then," Ethan said, settling into his chair. "Maybe we can commiserate." He extended his hand across the table. "I'm Ethan." "Elena," she replied, shaking his hand. Her grip was strong, Ethan noticed. Whatever had happened to her legs hadn't diminished the strength in her upper body. For the first few minutes, their conversation was awkward, in the way conversations between strangers often are stilted exchanges about the weather, the cafe's coffee quality, how Seattle's perpetual rain affected one's mood. But gradually, as they relaxed into each other's presence, the dialogue began to flow more naturally. Ethan didn't ask about the wheelchair, which Elena noticed and appreciated. Most people's curiosity about her disability was the first and often only thing they wanted to discuss, reducing her entire identity to her paralysis. But Ethan seemed genuinely interested in her, as a person asking about what she did for work. She freelanced as a grant writer for non-profits, something she'd started doing from home after the accident, and what books she was currently reading, whether she'd always lived in Seattle. "I was born here," Elena said. "Typical Seattle kid raised on coffee and rain, and an inherent distrust of anything that requires dressing up. What about you? You don't sound like you're from here originally." "Good ear," Ethan said, smiling slightly. "I grew up in rural Oregon, actually. Small town, not much opportunity, the kind of place where people stay because they don't know there are other options. I left for college and never really went back." "Do you miss it?" Elena asked. "The small town life?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I miss the simplicity of it, knowing everyone, the slower pace, the sense of community. But I don't miss the limitations. The belief that you should be satisfied with a simple life because wanting more was somehow ungrateful or presumptuous. Ambition as a betrayal of your roots," Elena said, understanding immediately. "I get that. My dad was a mechanic, my mom a school secretary. When I told them I wanted to be a dancer, they couldn't understand it. Why would I want an unstable career in the arts when I could do something practical? They loved me, but they didn't get the dream." "Did you become a dancer?" Ethan asked, then immediately saw Elena's face close off slightly. "I'm sorry, that's probably too personal a question for—" "No, it's okay," Elena interrupted, though her voice had gone quieter. "I was a dancer. I taught classes, performed locally, did some choreography for community theater. It was my whole life. But then I had an accident 2 years ago. Drunk driver T-boned my car and damaged my spinal cord. Now I'm paralyzed from the waist down, and dancing is something I used to do rather than something I am." The matter-of-fact way she delivered this information made it somehow more heartbreaking. Ethan felt the weight of what she'd lost, not just physical mobility, but identity, purpose, the thing that had defined her understanding of herself. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate but offering them anyway. "That's a devastating loss." "Thank you for saying that," Elena said, meeting his eyes directly. "Most people try to find a silver lining or tell me how I'm so brave or inspiring, but it's just devastating. I lost something fundamental to who I was, and there's no positive spin that makes that okay." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, rain continuing its steady percussion against the windows. Ethan appreciated that Elena didn't try to lighten the mood or apologize for bringing heaviness into their conversation. There was an honesty to her grief that felt refreshing after years of people performing positivity, regardless of their actual feelings. "What was your terrible business lunch about?" Elena asked, clearly wanting to shift focus away from her own loss. "You mentioned escaping from it." Ethan laughed, a sound without much humor. "A venture capitalist who spent an hour alternating between pitching investment opportunities and subtly insulting my background. Apparently, I'm an impressive example of how far someone from a working-class family can rise with the right opportunities," his exact words. "The implication being that my success is more about luck than talent." "That's infuriating," Elena said. "What do you do?" "Clearly something successful enough to attract venture capitalists." "I run a tech company," Ethan said, deliberately vague. "We do data security systems, mostly for corporations and government agencies. It's profitable and apparently impressive enough that people want to invest, despite thinking I'm somehow unworthy." Elena smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. The contempt of people who were born on third base and think they hit a triple. I know that type. They can't imagine that someone without their advantages might actually be more talented or work harder. "Exactly," Ethan said, feeling understood in a way that was surprisingly powerful. "What's your company called? Maybe I've heard of it." "Cole Innovations," Ethan said, then watched Elena's eyes widen with recognition. "You've heard of us, I take it?" "Heard of you?" "Ethan, Cole Innovations revolutionized data security. I wrote a grant proposal last year for a non-profit that was trying to implement your accessibility systems for protecting client data. You're not just successful, you're genuinely changing how organizations protect sensitive information." Ethan felt heat creep up his neck. "Well, that's embarrassing. Here I am complaining about people recognizing my success when I could have just introduced myself more honestly." "Don't be embarrassed," Elena said. "I actually appreciate that you didn't lead with that. Most wealthy people I've encountered can't wait to establish their status. You just wanted to have coffee with a stranger, which is infinitely more appealing." They talked for another 2 hours, the conversation flowing with the ease of people who'd known each other far longer than 90 minutes. Ethan told Elena about growing up poor, about working 3 jobs to pay for college, about the first investor who'd believed in his idea when everyone else thought he was delusional. Elena shared stories about dance, the pure joy of movement, the devastating beauty of expressing emotion through her body, the community she'd found in studios and theaters. "I still dream about dancing," Elena admitted quietly. "I wake up some mornings and for just a moment, I forget. I stretch in bed and expect my legs to respond. Then reality crashes back, and I remember all over again that this is permanent, that I'll never dance again." "What if you could find a different way?" Ethan asked carefully. "I don't mean to diminish what you've lost, but is there any way to engage with dance that doesn't require your legs? Choreography or teaching or something else?" "I thought about that," Elena said, "but honestly, it hurts too much right now. Being around dance, watching other people move the way I used to, it's like pressing on a bruise constantly. Maybe someday I'll find a way back to it, but right now I just need distance from that grief." "That makes sense," Ethan said. "Grief isn't something you rush through or logic your way past. You just survive it, day by day." You sound like you know something about grief," Elena observed. Ethan nodded slowly. "My mom died when I was 25. Cancer. I watched her deteriorate over 2 years. Watched this vibrant woman become a shadow, watched her lose everything bit by bit. For a long time after, I couldn't look at family photos or visit the places we'd gone together. The grief was too overwhelming. Eventually, it became something I could carry rather than something that was crushing me. But it took years. "I'm sorry," Elena said. "Losing a parent is its own kind of devastation. Thank you, and I'm sorry for what you've lost too. Your mobility, your identity as a dancer, your fiancé." He stopped abruptly. "I'm sorry. I'm making assumptions. You mentioned an accident 2 years ago and I just—" "You're right," Elena confirmed. "My fiancé left 6 months after the accident. He tried to make it work, but he couldn't handle it. I don't entirely blame him. This isn't the life he signed up for. But it still hurt like hell to be abandoned when I needed support most." Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed with a call. He glanced at it, saw his assistant's name, and declined it. "Sorry, work calling. I'm technically supposed to be in meetings all afternoon, but I'm finding this conversation far more valuable. I should probably let you go," Elena said, though her tone suggested she didn't actually want him to leave. "You have a company to run, and I've monopolized enough of your afternoon." "You haven't monopolized anything," Ethan protested. "This has been the best conversation I've had in months, probably years, if I'm being honest. Elena, I know this is sudden, but I'd really like to see you again. Have dinner or coffee or just talk more. Would that be okay?" Elena looked surprised, then cautiously pleased. "You actually want to spend more time with me? This isn't just you being nice to the sad girl in the wheelchair. This is me wanting to spend more time with Elena, the grant writer who used to be a dancer and who has strong opinions about coffee and who survived devastating loss without losing her ability to be honest about grief," Ethan said firmly. "The wheelchair is just how you get around. It's not who you are." Tears filled Elena's eyes suddenly. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. Most people either ignore the wheelchair completely in this weird pretending it doesn't exist way, or they make it my entire identity. You're the first person in 2 years who's managed to acknowledge it while still seeing me as a whole person." "Then most people are idiots," Ethan said bluntly, making Elena laugh through her tears. "Can I give you my number? And maybe take yours? I promise I'm not a stalker or a serial killer or anything concerning. Just a tech millionaire who enjoyed talking to you and wants to do it again." "Millionaire," Elena repeated, shaking her head slightly. "I'm having coffee with an actual millionaire who wants my phone number. This day has taken some very unexpected turns." They exchanged numbers, and Ethan paid for both their coffees, despite Elena's protests. "Consider it payment for saving me from hours of brooding about that terrible business lunch," he insisted. As they prepared to leave, Ethan holding the door, while Elena navigated her wheelchair through with practiced ease, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope, interest in another person that wasn't shadowed by suspicion about their motives, the possibility of genuine connection. "Thank you, Ethan," Elena said, pausing just outside the cafe door. Rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp. "For sitting with me, for talking to me like a person, for making what started as a pretty terrible day into something actually good." "Thank you for letting me join you," Ethan replied, "for trusting a stranger enough to have an honest conversation, for reminding me that meaningful connection is still possible even when you've almost given up on it." They parted with promises to text soon, and Ethan watched Elena roll away down the sidewalk, navigating the rain-wet concrete with capability that suggested years of practice. He stood there longer than necessary, feeling the cool October air and thinking about dark eyes and honest grief, and a woman who'd lost so much but hadn't lost herself. This was the beginning of something, Ethan thought. He didn't know what yet, friendship maybe, or something more if they were both brave enough, but it was definitely the beginning of something important. Elena, rolling toward the accessible parking spot where she'd left her modified van, was thinking similar thoughts. For the first time in 2 years, someone had seen her as more than her disability, had engaged with her as a whole person with thoughts and feelings and experiences beyond the wheelchair. It felt revolutionary, this simple act of being treated like she mattered. She didn't know yet that Ethan would send flowers to her apartment within a week, didn't know that their tentative friendship would grow into something profound and transformative. Didn't know that the stranger who'd picked up her phone that rainy afternoon would become the person who taught her that love didn't require her to be unchanged or undamaged, just willing to be seen and valued exactly as she was. All Elena knew was that for 3 hours in a cafe, she'd felt like herself again. Not the dancer she'd been, not the paralyzed woman she'd become, but simply Elena, complex and grieving and still capable of connection. And that felt like enough. For now, it felt like everything. 1 week after their cafe encounter, Elena was working at her home office, a corner of her accessible apartment that she'd converted into a surprisingly efficient workspace, when her doorbell rang. She wheeled to the door, checking the security camera first out of habit. A delivery person stood holding an enormous bouquet of flowers, the kind of arrangement that probably cost more than Elena spent on groceries in a month. Confused, Elena opened the door. "Elena Brooks?" the delivery person confirmed. "These are for you." Elena signed for the flowers, then maneuvered them inside. With some difficulty, the arrangement was so large, it blocked her view while rolling backward in her wheelchair. She set them on her kitchen table, and only then saw the card tucked among white roses, lilies, and some purple flowers she couldn't identify. "Coffee tastes better when you're not drinking it alone. E." Elena stared at the card for a long moment, feeling something complicated unfold in her chest. Part warmth, part fear, part disbelief that someone like Ethan, successful, attractive, presumably having dozens of better options, would send her flowers, would remember her at all after a single afternoon conversation. She texted him before she could overthink it. "The flowers are beautiful. You didn't have to do this." His response came almost immediately. "I know I didn't have to. I wanted to. They reminded me of our conversation, genuine and unexpectedly beautiful. Have dinner with me this weekend." Elena stared at her phone, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to protect herself from inevitable disappointment. Men like Ethan didn't date women like her, damaged, complicated, requiring accommodations that most people found burdensome. He was probably just being kind, would realize after one dinner that this wasn't what he wanted. But another part of her, the part that had felt truly seen for the first time in 2 years, during their cafe conversation, wanted desperately to say, "Yes, I'd like that," she finally typed. "But I need you to know this isn't easy for me. Dating when you're in a wheelchair is complicated. If you're doing this out of pity or some savior complex, please just tell me now." Ethan's response took longer this time. "Elena, I'm asking you to dinner because I enjoyed talking to you more than I've enjoyed talking to anyone in years. Because you're intelligent and honest and interesting. Because I want to know you better. Your wheelchair is part of your reality, but it's not why I'm interested. Is that clear enough?" She smiled despite herself. "Clear enough." Saturday night? Saturday arrived with Elena experiencing more anxiety than she'd felt since before the accident. She changed outfits 3 times, each time finding something wrong. This dress made her look too formal, this one too casual. This one emphasized her non-functioning legs in ways that made her self-conscious. Finally, she settled on dark jeans and a deep green sweater that brought out her eyes, her hair left loose around her shoulders. Ethan picked her up at 6:30, and Elena appreciated that he'd asked ahead of time about her van's accessibility features rather than assuming he knew what would work. He was dressed casually, jeans and a button-down shirt, rather than the suit he'd worn at the cafe. And he greeted her with genuine warmth, rather than the nervous pity she'd come to expect from dates. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Ready for dinner?" "Where are we going?" Elena asked, as Ethan helped her navigate into his car. A process she'd learned required patience and willingness to let her direct what she needed. "A little Italian place in Capitol Hill," Ethan said. "I called ahead to confirm accessibility, wide doorways, accessible bathroom, tables at the right height. The owner assured me they're fully compliant and welcoming, but if it doesn't work when we get there, we'll find somewhere else." The thoughtfulness of that, not just assuming but actually verifying, having a backup plan, made Elena's throat tight. "Thank you for checking. Most people don't think of that. Most people haven't spent the past week reading everything they can find about wheelchair accessibility. because they want to make sure a woman they're interested in feels comfortable, Ethan said. I may have become slightly obsessive about it. Dinner was remarkable in its normalcy. The restaurant was indeed accessible, the staff warm and accommodating without being patronizing. Ethan and Elena talked for 3 hours, the conversation flowing as easily as it had at the cafe. They discussed books they loved, movies that had shaped their worldviews, the complexity of navigating success when you came from nothing. People assume wealth solves all problems, Ethan said over dessert, but it creates new ones. You stop knowing if people like you or what you can do for them. Every friendship feels transactional. Every romantic relationship is shadowed by questions about motivation. It's lonely in ways that are hard to explain. And that sounds exhausting, Elena said. At least my loneliness is straightforward. People are uncomfortable around disability, so they avoid me. I don't have to question their motives because they're usually pretty transparent. Do you ever get angry about it? Ethan asked. The way people treat you differently now. All the time, Elena admitted, especially at the beginning. I was so angry at the drunk driver, at my body for braking, at Marcus for leaving, at friends who drifted away, at strangers who either stared or carefully didn't look at all. The anger was consuming for a while. What changed? Therapy, Elena said bluntly. A lot of therapy, and eventually realizing that staying angry was just hurting me. The people I was angry at didn't care or couldn't change, and I was poisoning my own life. So I learned to accept what is while still being honest about how much it sucks. If you've ever struggled with disability or chronic illness and felt invisible to the world, drop a comment and subscribe. This story reminds us that being seen, truly seen beyond our limitations, can be transformative, that sometimes the person who notices us is exactly who we need to meet. They started seeing each other regularly after that first dinner. Twice a week became 3 times, then 4. Ethan integrated seamlessly into Elena's life, meeting her for coffee during his lunch breaks, coming to her apartment for takeout dinners, including her in his world without making her feel like she was being showcased. 2 months into dating, Ethan picked Elena up for what she assumed would be their usual Saturday dinner. Instead, he drove to a building downtown, one of Seattle's new construction high-rises that mixed commercial and residential space. Where are we going? Elena asked, as Ethan parked in an accessible spot. I want to show you something, he said mysteriously. Trust me? They took the elevator to the 15th floor, Ethan using a keycard to access it. When the doors opened, Elena found herself in what was clearly office space but empty, unfurnished, just open floor plans and windows offering views of Elliott Bay. This is one of my company's new office locations, Ethan explained. We're expanding, and I'm overseeing the design of this space. Elena, I want to show you what we're planning for accessibility, and I want your honest feedback. Not as a favor to you, but because you have expertise I need. For the next hour, Ethan walked Elena through the architectural plans, pointing out features designed for accessibility, adjustable height desks, wide aisles between workstations, accessible bathrooms on every floor, meeting rooms designed to accommodate wheelchairs comfortably. This is impressive, Elena said, genuinely moved. Most companies do the bare minimum for ADA compliance. You're going beyond that. Because the bare minimum isn't good enough, Ethan said. I have employees and clients who use wheelchairs or have other disabilities. Why should they have to navigate spaces designed to make them feel like accommodations rather than welcome guests? But Elena, I need your expertise. What am I missing? What would make this genuinely welcoming rather than just technically compliant? Elena spent another hour offering suggestions: lower light switches, automatic door openers, sensory considerations for people with other disabilities beyond mobility issues. Ethan took notes on everything, asking questions, genuinely engaged with making the space as accessible as possible. Why does this matter so much to you? Elena asked as they prepared to leave. I mean, obviously accessibility should matter to everyone, but you're putting extraordinary effort into this. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Honestly, meeting you made me realize how many spaces exclude people unnecessarily, how much talent and perspective companies lose because their physical spaces say, You don't belong here to people with disabilities. I can't fix everything, but I can make sure my company's spaces are genuinely welcoming. That's..." Elena felt tears threaten. "Ethan, that's one of the most meaningful things anyone's ever done. Not for me directly, but because of me. You're changing actual systems rather than just being nice to one disabled person. You deserve more than just people being nice to you," Ethan said firmly. "You deserve spaces and systems and a world designed to include you. I can't change everything, but I can change what's in my control." 3 months into their relationship, Elena invited Ethan to her weekly physical therapy appointment. "I want you to see this part of my life," she explained. "The unglamorous, painful, frustrating part. If we're going to keep seeing each other, you need to understand what dating me actually means." Ethan sat quietly in the therapy room, watching as Elena worked through exercises designed to maintain her upper body strength and prevent muscle atrophy in her legs. He saw her grimace through pain, saw her frustration when her body wouldn't cooperate, saw the determination that drove her to keep pushing despite how much it hurt. Afterward, in her van, Elena asked quietly, "Well, was that too much reality for you?" "That was you being incredibly strong," Ethan said. "Elena, I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you think I need to be scared off by, it's not your physical therapy or your wheelchair or the challenges you face. The only thing that would scare me off is if you decided you didn't want me around." "Why me?" Elena asked, the question she'd been holding back for months finally escaping. "Ethan, you're brilliant and successful and attractive. You could date literally anyone. Why are you choosing to be with someone whose life is this complicated?" "Because you're the first person in years who sees me as Ethan rather than as Ethan Cole, tech millionaire," he said simply. "Because you challenge me intellectually. Because you're honest in ways most people can't manage. Because being with you feels real, in ways nothing else in my life does. Your wheelchair isn't a complication I'm tolerating, Elena. It's just part of the reality of who you are, and who you are is exactly who I want to be with." Elena cried, then not sad tears but overwhelmed ones, the kind that come from being seen and valued in ways you'd stopped believing were possible. Ethan held her while she cried, not trying to fix or minimize, just being present. 6 months into their relationship, Ethan asked Elena to accompany him to a charity gala. "I know these events aren't your favorite thing," he prefaced. "They're not mine either, honestly. But this one matters. It's raising money for spinal injury research. I've been a quiet donor for years, but after meeting you, I want to be more public about supporting this work. I'd like you there with me, if you're comfortable with that." Elena felt nervous about attending such a high-profile event. These galas were full of Seattle's wealthy elite, exactly the kind of people who usually made her feel invisible or pitied. But Ethan's request felt significant, like he was publicly claiming their relationship in a way that mattered. "Okay," she agreed, "but I need a dress that works with my wheelchair, and I need you to promise you'll stay close. These events can be overwhelming for me." Ethan not only helped Elena find an appropriate dress, a deep blue gown that was both elegant and practical, but also called the venue ahead of time to ensure accessibility, reserved a parking spot near the entrance, and made sure Elena's needs were accommodated without making her feel like a burden. The gala itself was as overwhelming as Elena had feared. Hundreds of beautifully dressed people in a grand ballroom, most of whom stared at Elena's wheelchair with either pity or discomfort. But Ethan stayed beside her the entire evening, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, introducing her to people as Elena Brooks, my girlfriend and brilliant grant writer, rather than making her disability the defining characteristic. Halfway through the evening, the gala's MC announced a special presentation. Elena was startled when Ethan squeezed her hand and stood, walking to the small stage at the front of the ballroom. "What's happening?" she whispered to the woman at their table, who smiled knowingly. "Just watch." Ethan took the microphone, looking more nervous than Elena had ever seen him. "Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Ethan Cole. I run a tech company. I've been fortunate in business, and until recently, I gave money to causes like spinal injury research, without thinking much about the actual people affected by these injuries. He paused, looking directly at Elena. 6 months ago, I met someone who changed my perspective on everything. Elena Brooks is a former dancer who was paralyzed in a drunk driving accident 2 years ago. When I met her, she was sitting alone in a cafe, abandoned by friends who'd promised to show up. I joined her, and we talked for 3 hours, the best conversation I'd had in years. Elena felt heat rise in her face as everyone turned to look at her. But Ethan continued, his voice strong and clear. Elena taught me that disability isn't tragedy. It's just a different way of moving through the world. She taught me that accessibility isn't charity, it's basic decency. That people with disabilities don't need to be saved or pitied. They need spaces and systems designed to include them. They need to be seen as whole people, not defined by what their bodies can or can't do. Ethan pulled out a prepared statement. Tonight, I'm announcing the establishment of the Brooks Foundation for Spinal Injury Research and Accessibility Innovation. I'm committing $5 million initially, with plans to grow that significantly. But more than money, this foundation will focus on practical accessibility improvements, auditing public spaces, consulting with businesses, creating employment programs specifically for people with disabilities. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. This wasn't just about her. Ethan was creating systemic change inspired by their relationship. And Elena, Ethan said, his voice softening as he looked directly at her, I want you to be the foundation's director, not as a figurehead, but as the person who shapes its mission and ensures it actually serves the community it's meant to help. You have expertise I'll never have, and I want that expertise driving this work. The ballroom erupted in applause. Elena sat stunned, unable to process what had just happened. Ethan returned to their table, kneeling beside her wheelchair so they were at eye level. I should have asked you privately first, he said. That was presumptuous of me. But Elena, I want to build this with you. Will you help me create something meaningful? You created a foundation, Elena managed, and named it after me, and offered me a job running it? I created a foundation because you showed me these issues matter, Ethan corrected. I named it after you because you inspired it, and I'm offering you the director position because you're the most qualified person I know. This isn't charity or pity. This is recognizing expertise and passion. How long did? Yes, Elena said, laughing through her tears. Yes, I'll help you. I'll run your foundation. But Ethan, this is insane. This is $5 million committed to work that matters, and you did this because of me. I did this because of us, Ethan said, because you taught me what actually matters. And Elena, I love you. I should probably say that not in front of hundreds of people, but I love you. Your strength, your honesty, your refusal to be diminished by circumstances that would have destroyed most people. I love who you are, and I want to build a life with you. Elena pulled him closer, kissing him despite the crowd watching. I love you too, she whispered. You see me, Ethan. Actually see me. That's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. The rest of the evening was a blur of congratulations, people wanting to discuss the foundation, Elena answering questions about spinal injury research and accessibility needs. For the first time since her accident, Elena felt not just accepted but valued for her expertise and experience. The thing that had destroyed her old life was becoming the foundation for meaningful new work. Later that night, back at Elena's apartment, they sat together on her couch, Elena in her wheelchair beside it, Ethan on the cushions, both exhausted but happy. I can't believe you did that, Elena said. Created an entire foundation, offered me a dream job, declared your love in front of Seattle's wealthy elite. I probably should have planned that better, Ethan admitted. The public declaration part was not my smoothest moment. It was perfect, Elena assured him. Overwhelming and slightly terrifying, but perfect. Ethan, you're changing my life. Not by fixing me or making my disability go away, but by creating space for me to use my experience meaningfully. That's what I needed, not to be saved, but to be valued. You've changed my life too, Ethan said. Before you, I was successful but empty, going through motions, making money, building a company, but not connected to anything meaningful. You reminded me what actually matters: connection, purpose, using resources to create change rather than just accumulate wealth. I'm a better person because of you, Elena." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing the evening's events. Finally, Elena said, "So I'm going to be a foundation director. That's going to require me to be much more public than I'm comfortable with." "Only as public as you want to be," Ethan said. "This is your foundation to shape however serves the mission best. But Elena, I think you're going to be incredible at this. You understand the challenges from lived experience. You know what actually helps versus what sounds good but doesn't work. You're going to change lives." "We're going to change lives," Elena corrected. "This is a partnership, right? You providing resources and business expertise, me providing disability, community knowledge, and passion. Together, Ethan agreed. "In the foundation and in everything else. Elena, I meant what I said tonight. I love you, and I want to build a life with you. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know I want you in my future." "I want that too," Elena said. "It scares me. I've been alone for so long, and letting someone in is terrifying. But I want to try. Want to build something real with you." They spent the night talking about the foundation, what programs they'd develop first, how they'd ensure authentic community involvement, what barriers they could actually address with $5 million and growing resources. But underneath the practical planning was something deeper. Two people who'd found each other in unlikely circumstances, who'd learned to see past surface circumstances to actual humanity, who were building love on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine connection. Elena had thought her life was over after the accident. That meaningful work, genuine love, belonging in the world, all of that had ended when she'd lost her ability to dance. But sitting with Ethan, planning a foundation that would help thousands of people with disabilities, feeling loved and valued exactly as she was, Elena realized she'd been wrong. Her life hadn't ended. It had just transformed into something she'd never imagined, but that was somehow more meaningful than anything she'd lost. The dancer she'd been was gone, yes, but the woman she was becoming, advocate, foundation director, partner to someone who saw her completely, that woman had value and purpose that transcended physical mobility. Sometimes tragedy is just an ending, but sometimes, if you're fortunate enough to find people who see beyond circumstances to your actual worth, tragedy becomes a beginning, a chance to build something entirely new, something you'd never have discovered without being broken open first. Elena and Ethan were building that together, and it was more beautiful than either of them had dared to hope. 1 year after the gala announcement, the Brooks Foundation for Spinal Injury Research and Accessibility Innovation had transformed from an ambitious idea into a thriving organization, making measurable impact across Seattle and beyond. Elena sat in her office, a beautiful space in Cole Innovation's accessible building, designed with input from her and other wheelchair users, reviewing grant applications from researchers developing new spinal cord injury treatments. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Lunch break in 20 minutes? Want to escape to our cafe?" Elena smiled. Their cafe had become Cafe Solstice, the place where they'd first met. They returned there at least once a week, sitting at that same window table, remembering how two lonely people had found each other in the most ordinary of circumstances. "See you there," Elena replied, then finished reviewing the grant application she'd been working through. The foundation had funded 12 research projects in its first year, awarded accessibility improvement grants to 43 businesses, created an employment program that had placed 17 people with disabilities in meaningful jobs, and launched an advocacy initiative addressing transportation barriers. The work was exhausting and rewarding in equal measure, exactly what Elena needed, purpose that honored her experience rather than being limited by it. 20 minutes later, Elena wheeled into Cafe Solstice to find Ethan already at their table, 2 coffees waiting. He stood when she arrived, kissing her gently before sitting back down. "How's your morning been?" he asked. "Productive. I'm reviewing applications for the new round of research grants, and the quality is incredible. We're going to fund some genuinely transformative work." Elena took a sip of her coffee, perfectly made, exactly how she liked it. How about you? How's the new product launch looking? Complicated but on track, Ethan said. We're close to finalizing the accessibility features for the new security system. I want you to review them before we lock anything in. Make sure we're actually serving users with disabilities rather than just checking compliance boxes. They talked easily about work, about the Foundation's upcoming fundraiser, about mundane details of their lives. An observer wouldn't have seen anything remarkable, just a couple having lunch, comfortable and familiar with each other. But for Elena, this normalcy was revolutionary. Being treated as an equal partner, her expertise valued, her presence desired not despite her wheelchair but simply because of who she was. This was what she'd thought she'd lost forever after the accident. I have something I want to show you, Ethan said after they'd finished eating. Can you come somewhere with me? Mysterious, Elena said. Where are we going? You'll see. Ethan drove them to a building in Capitol Hill that Elena didn't recognize, a beautiful old converted warehouse with wide entrances and carefully maintained accessibility features. He pulled into the accessible parking spot, then helped Elena out of the car with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned exactly what she needed. Okay, seriously, where are we? Elena asked as Ethan led her toward the building's entrance. This, Ethan said, unlocking the door with a key, is something I've been working on for 6 months, something I hope you'll love. The interior took Elena's breath away. It was a dance studio, but unlike any dance studio she'd seen. The floors were smooth and accessible, with clear pathways wide enough for wheelchairs. Mirrors covered one wall, positioned at heights that would show both standing dancers and those in wheelchairs. Barriers were installed at multiple heights. The sound system looked state-of-the-art, but what made Elena's throat tighten with emotion was the group of people in the studio, some in wheelchairs, some using walkers or crutches, some standing, all of them moving to music, an instructor demonstrating movements that adapted to different bodies and abilities. This was adaptive dance, choreographed to include rather than exclude. What is this? Elena whispered. This is yours if you want it, Ethan said. I bought this building, renovated it for full accessibility, and hired Emma Chen. She's one of the country's leading adaptive dance instructors. Elena, I know you said returning to dance hurt too much, but I thought maybe if dance could come to you in a new form, if you could teach and choreograph for dancers with all kinds of bodies, maybe you could find your way back to what you love. Elena couldn't speak. She just watched the dancers moving, saw the joy on their faces, the community forming, the beauty of movement adapted but not diminished. This was dance reimagined, dance that included her rather than leaving her behind. You built me a dance studio, she finally managed. Ethan, you built an entire accessible dance studio. I built a space, Ethan corrected. You'll fill it with your expertise and passion if you choose to. Emma's willing to collaborate with you or step aside entirely if you'd rather run it yourself. This is yours, Elena. Your space to reclaim dance on your terms. If you've ever lost something you loved and thought it was gone forever, if you've ever had someone see your grief and create space for healing rather than just trying to fix you, drop a comment and subscribe. This story shows us that sometimes love means understanding what someone needs, even when they can't articulate it themselves. Elena wheeled closer to the studio's observation window, watching the adaptive dance class with tears streaming down her face. She saw herself in those dancers, people who'd lost the ability to move how they once had, but were finding new ways to express themselves through movement. This wasn't the dance she'd known before the accident, but it was dance nonetheless, alive and beautiful and welcoming. I don't know if I can do this, Elena admitted. Being around dance again, even this version, what if it's too painful? Then we close this studio and find another use for the building, Ethan said simply. Elena, this isn't an expectation or pressure. It's an option, a possibility. You can explore it, reject it, embrace it, or anything in between. I just wanted to give you the choice. Can I try? Elena asked. Just sit in on a class, see how it feels. Of course, Ethan spoke with Emma, who welcomed Elena warmly and invited her to join the current class. For the next hour, Elena watched and gradually participated as Emma led the dancers through movements that adapted to different abilities. Some movements Elena could do fully, others required modification, but the spirit was there, the music, the expression, the community of people moving together. By the end of the class, Elena was crying again, but these were different tears, not grief, but something like hope. She'd found a way back to dance, not as she'd known it before, but as something new, something that included her, that valued her experience, that welcomed her home. "Thank you," Elena told Ethan afterward, back in the observation area. "This is the most thoughtful, generous, perfect gift anyone's ever given me. You didn't try to fix my paralysis or return me to who I was before. You created space for who I am now, to reconnect with what I loved. Ethan, that's everything. You've given me so much," Ethan said. "Purpose, genuine connection, a reason to use my resources for something that actually matters. Giving this back to you is the least I can do." Over the following months, Elena began teaching at the Adaptive Dance Studio 2 days a week, working alongside Emma to develop programs that served dancers of all abilities. She discovered that teaching dance to people who'd also lost abilities they once took for granted was profoundly healing. She understood their grief, could honor their losses while also helping them find new ways to move and express themselves. The studio became another arm of the Brooks Foundation, offering free and subsidized classes to people with disabilities who couldn't afford traditional adaptive dance programs. Elena choreographed pieces that showcased the beauty of adapted movement, staging performances that challenged audiences' assumptions about what dance could be. 2 years after meeting in the cafe, Ethan proposed to Elena in the most perfect way imaginable. He'd arranged a private adaptive dance performance at the studio, Elena's students performing a piece she'd choreographed, expressing the journey from loss to healing through movement. At the end of the performance, Ethan rolled onto the studio floor in a wheelchair. He'd been practicing for weeks, learning to navigate her world, and asked her to marry him. "You may not be able to dance the way you once did," Ethan said, kneeling beside her wheelchair, "but you've made my world move in ways I never imagined possible. You've taught me what actually matters, what real strength looks like, what love means when it's built on seeing someone completely. Elena Brooks, will you marry me?" "Yes," Elena said, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, absolutely yes." Their wedding 6 months later was a celebration of adaptive beauty held at the dance studio, with performances by Elena's students, accessibility accommodations that made every guest feel welcomed regardless of ability. Elena wore a dress designed to work with her wheelchair, beautiful and practical. Ethan's vows mentioned how she'd changed his understanding of strength, success, and what made life meaningful. "I was successful before I met you," Ethan said during the ceremony, "but I wasn't fulfilled. I had money and professional achievement, but I was profoundly lonely, convinced that genuine connection was impossible in my world. Then I saw you sitting alone in a cafe, and something made me approach instead of walking past. That decision changed everything." Elena's vows were equally moving. "I thought my life ended when I became paralyzed. Thought dancing was lost. Love was impossible. Purpose had disappeared. But you saw me, not the wheelchair, not the limitations, just me. You created space for me to reconnect with dance, to do meaningful work, to be loved exactly as I am. You didn't rescue me, Ethan. You sat beside me and refused to leave, and that made all the difference." 5 years after their cafe meeting, Elena and Ethan stood and sat in the Brooks Foundation's expanded headquarters, celebrating the opening of their 10th adaptive dance studio nationwide. The foundation had grown exponentially, now funding hundreds of research projects, transforming accessibility in dozens of cities, employing over 50 people with disabilities in meaningful careers. But for Elena, the most meaningful work remained the dance studios. Watching people who'd lost abilities rediscover joy in movement, seeing communities form around adaptive dance, hearing stories about how the classes had given people purpose after devastating injuries. This was impact she could see and feel. "Do you ever think about that day in the cafe?" Ethan asked during the celebration. "When we met?" "All the time," Elena admitted. I think about how alone I felt, how convinced I was that my life was over. And then this stranger sat down and actually saw me, and everything changed. You saved my life too, you know, Ethan said. Not dramatically, not literally, but completely. You showed me what mattered, what success actually meant, how to use privilege for good rather than just accumulation. Before you, I was making money but not meaning. After you, I had purpose. We saved each other, Elena said. That's what the best relationships do. They show us what we couldn't see in ourselves, create space for growth we didn't know was possible. 10 years after the cafe meeting, Elena published a memoir about her journey from dancer to paralyzed woman to disability advocate and adaptive dance pioneer. The book became a bestseller, resonating with people who'd experienced devastating loss and were searching for paths forward. Elena spoke at conferences, advised organizations on accessibility, continued teaching adaptive dance, and built a life of meaning from experiences that had once seemed purely tragic. Ethan remained her partner in everything in the Foundation's work, in their marriage, in the ongoing project of building accessible systems and spaces. His company had become known for industry-leading accessibility features, setting standards that other tech companies followed. He'd transformed from someone who viewed disability as something to accommodate into someone who understood accessibility as fundamental design principle. They had children, 2 daughters who grew up understanding disability as normal variation rather than tragedy, who had wheelchair-using friends and accessible birthday parties, and genuine understanding that bodies come in all configurations and all deserve dignity. Elena and Ethan taught them early that kindness meant seeing people completely, that privilege carried responsibility, that the best use of resources was creating space for everyone to thrive. 15 years after the cafe meeting, Elena and Ethan returned to Cafe Solstice for their anniversary, their tradition, returning to where it all began. They sat at the same window table, ordered the same drinks, and remembered that rainy October afternoon when 2 lonely people had found each other. If you could go back to that day, Ethan asked, knowing everything that would come from it, what would you tell yourself? I'd tell myself that being left alone at a cafe was actually a gift, Elena said, because it meant I was there, available, when the right person walked up. I'd tell myself that the accident didn't end my life, just transformed it into something I couldn't have imagined. I'd tell myself to trust that loss isn't always just loss. Sometimes it's the clearing that makes space for something new. What would you tell yourself? Elena asked Ethan. I'd tell myself to always notice the person sitting alone, Ethan said, to trust the instinct toward kindness, to understand that the most important business I'd ever conduct wouldn't happen in conference rooms, but in conversations with someone who'd teach me what actually mattered. I'd tell myself that she was worth far more than any deal I'd close. They sat in comfortable silence, watching rain trace patterns on the window just like that first day. So much had changed, yet something essential remained the same. 2 people choosing to see each other, to build something meaningful together, to prove that connection transcends circumstances when it's real enough. Elena looked at Ethan Greer now, laugh lines around his eyes, still looking at her like she was the most important person in any room. Thank you, she said quietly, for sitting with me that day, for staying, for building a life with me rather than for me. Thank you for letting me, Ethan replied, for teaching me what strength actually looks like, for showing me that love isn't about fixing people, it's about seeing them completely and choosing to stay anyway. As they left the cafe that anniversary afternoon, Elena reflected on the journey from that first encounter to this moment. She'd been abandoned by friends, left alone in a cafe, convinced her life was diminished beyond repair. Then a stranger had approached not to save her, not out of pity but out of genuine interest in her as a person. That choice, Ethan's decision to sit down and talk rather than walking past, had rippled outward in ways neither could have predicted. A foundation serving thousands, dance studios welcoming hundreds, a marriage built on mutual respect and genuine seeing, children growing up understanding accessibility as normal, lives changed through work that honored experience rather than being limited by it. She thought she'd been left behind by life, Elena had written in her memoir's final chapter, until a stranger saw her, Not as broken, but as beautiful. Sometimes love doesn't rescue you, it simply sits beside you and refuses to leave. And that presence, that choosing to stay, that changes everything. That remained true 15 years later. Ethan hadn't rescued Elena from her wheelchair or her limitations. He'd seen her humanity, valued her expertise, created space for her to build meaningful life rather than trying to return her to who she'd been before. He'd understood that love meant accepting someone completely, grief and strength, losses and possibilities, wheelchair and all. And Elena had done the same for him, teaching Ethan that success without meaning was empty, that privilege carried responsibility, that the best use of resources was creating systems that included rather than excluded. She'd given him purpose that went beyond profit, connection that transcended transaction, love that was built on seeing and being seen. Together, they'd built something neither could have created alone. Not a fairy tale where the prince rescued the damsel, but a real story where two broken people found each other and chose to build healing together, where loss became the foundation for meaning, where tragedy transformed into purpose. As Elena wheeled down Seattle streets toward home, Ethan walking beside her, she thought about all the people who'd abandoned her after the accident, the friends who'd drifted away, the fiancé who'd left, the strangers who'd looked past her or stared with pity. She'd been angry at them once, felt diminished by their inability to see her worth. But now, 15 years later, she understood that their departure had made space for something better, for Ethan, who saw her completely, for work that mattered, for community built around mutual understanding, for love that didn't require her to be unchanged or undamaged, just willing to be seen. Sometimes being left alone in a cafe is tragedy, but sometimes it's the exact circumstance needed for the right person to find you, for two lonely people to recognize each other across a crowded room, for a conversation to begin that transforms two lives and eventually hundreds more. Elena had been left alone that October afternoon, but she'd never been alone since, and that made all the difference. The paralyzed woman and the millionaire, brought together by loneliness and kept together by love that transcended circumstances. Their story proved that sometimes the people society overlooks are exactly the ones who teach us what actually matters, that disability doesn't diminish worth. That real love means creating space for someone to be fully themselves, rather than trying to change them into who they used to be. And it all started because one man chose kindness over avoidance, chose to see a woman in a wheelchair as a whole person worthy of conversation, chose to sit down and stay. That choice changed everything, and 15 years later, it kept changing lives through foundations and dance studios, through advocacy and research, through the simple but revolutionary act of building a world that welcomed everyone, a world where being paralyzed didn't mean being left behind, where wheelchairs were just how some people moved, not definitions of their worth, where love and purpose and meaning were accessible to everyone willing to reach for them. Elena and Ethan had built that world together, and it was beautiful.